I had always believed that hard work spoke for itself, but in our house, it seemed that only my sister's voice ever reached my mother's ears. I remember the evening clearly, the living room bathed in the warm glow of the table lamp. My latest project spread across the coffee table, like a tapestry of everything I had poured my soul into. Every brushstroke, every note, every painstaking detail carried a piece of me, and yet, as I waited for her acknowledgement, I felt the familiar pit in my stomach. Mom walked in, smiling, eyes landing not on my work, but on the unopened notebook beside it. My sister's work, which she had barely touched. "Oh, honey, your sister really outdid herself this time," she said, brushing her fingers over the edge of my sister's notebook like it was some sacred relic. "She deserves all the credit." I froze. The words weren't just unfair. They were sharp, slicing through me in a way that left me breathless. I opened my mouth to protest, to explain that I had spent weeks on this project, sacrificing sleep and everything else, but the words caught in my throat. My mother's gaze held no room for me, no curiosity, no warmth, only praise for the person who had barely contributed. I looked at my sister sitting nearby, her expression neutral, almost casual, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She didn't need to notice. She was always the golden child, the one whose smile was celebrated and whose every small action was amplified into brilliance. And I existed only as a shadow in her light, a constant reminder of all that went unseen. The humiliation settled deep in my chest, heavier than any failure could ever be. I wanted to cry, to scream, to tear the notebook off the table and demand recognition, but I didn't. I had learned early that protest would only make me seem petty. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded politely, and forced a smile that tasted bitter in my mouth. Later, in the quiet of my room, I let the anger out in scribbles across my journal. Pages filled with frustration, with disbelief, with a burning sense of betrayal. How could someone so close, someone who should have seen me, choose blindness over truth? Each word I wrote was a whisper of rebellion, a small spark in the darkness, hinting at the storm I would one day unleash. I remembered every moment that had led to this, every night I had stayed up refining my work, while my sister lounged on the couch, every time I had been praised for being helpful, while my contributions were erased from memory. It wasn't just a single act of favoritism. It was a lifetime of being invisible, of watching the world reward someone else for what was rightfully mine. And in that quiet, bitter hour, I made a decision. I would not remain the invisible one forever. I would find a way to make her see, to make my mother see, that I was more than the shadow in my sister's light. The thought of revenge was sweet, but even sweeter was the idea of justice, the kind that couldn't be argued with, that wouldn't need words. Records, proofs, evidence, they would tell the story my mother refused to hear, and when they did, no one could ignore me ever again. For the first time in years, I felt a thrill of possibility. The fire of anger had turned into determination, sharp and quiet, ready to burn through the injustice that had haunted me for so long. The first time I stepped into my sister's room alone, my heart pounded like a drum, a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had never been allowed in there without her hovering beside me, and even now I felt like an intruder, a thief sneaking into a world that wasn't meant for me. But this was different. This wasn't about curiosity or mischief. It was about reclaiming the truth, about proving, finally, that I had been the one carrying the weight all along. Her room was a shrine to mediocrity dressed as genius, notebooks half, filled with ideas, projects that looked polished at first glance but lacked substance, and trophies whose origins were murky at best. I moved quietly, careful not to knock over the stacks of paper she always left precariously piled on her desk. I began sorting through everything, my fingers trembling as I flipped through notebooks that contained only fragments of her supposed brilliance. Then, tucked under a pile of unremarkable sketches, I found it. The proof, old school records, report cards with my name scrawled in careful handwriting, accolades I had earned but never displayed. There were photos of presentations I had given, video clips of performances I had rehearsed for weeks, and even email exchanges where teachers and mentors had praised my work. Each piece felt like a shard of validation I had been denied for years. My chest swelled with a mix of vindication and guilt. This wasn't just evidence, it was my story, finally waiting to be told. I spent nights going through boxes in the attic, digging through drawers and files my mother had ignored, convinced that they weren't important. Every certificate I unearthed, every recording I stumbled upon, fueled a growing fire inside me. It wasn't enough to be right. I needed the truth to shine like sunlight through the clouds, undeniable and brilliant. The more I collected, the more I realized how extensive the erasure had been. My mother hadn't just overlooked me. She had rewritten history, placing my sister at the center while I remained a ghost. There were moments when I questioned myself, when a pang of guilt made me hesitate. Was this petty? Was I crossing a line? But then I reminded myself of the humiliation, the countless times I had swallowed my pride while my sister received praise for work she hadn't done. This wasn't about revenge born of cruelty. It was about setting the record straight, and truth, I decided, was a weapon far sharper than anger. I began organizing everything meticulously, video clips labeled by date, certificates stacked chronologically, copies of messages, emails, and even drafts of projects where my hand was unmistakably the author. Every detail mattered, every piece had to be irrefutable. I imagined the moment I would reveal it all. My mother's surprise, my sister's shock. The quiet satisfaction of watching truth replace the lies she had always told herself. In those quiet nights, alone with my growing archive of proof, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Not the kind that comes from shouting or lashing out, but the subtle, steady kind that comes from knowledge and preparation. I was no longer the invisible one. I was patient, careful, and deliberate, and when the time came, I would not just demand recognition. I would make it impossible for anyone to deny it. The fire that had started as anger was now refined, focused, and ready. My revenge would be quiet, precise, and sweet, built on the undeniable truth that I had always deserved to be seen. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost unremarkably, as if the universe itself wanted to let the truth speak without interference. I had planned everything meticulously, making sure every piece of evidence was in order, every record labeled, every video clip cued. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about precision. About the undeniable proof, finally confronting the lies my mother had told herself for years. The living room was the same as always: warm light, familiar furniture. But today it felt different. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of my sister's notebook, the distant hum of the refrigerator, even the ticking of the clock on the wall. My mother was there, naturally, ready to shower my sister with praise the moment she opened her mouth. My sister, blissfully unaware, was twirling a pen between her fingers, waiting for the compliment she had been primed to expect. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every year of being overlooked pressing on my shoulders. I could see the confusion in my mother's eyes when I spoke first, calm but deliberate. "Mom, I think it's time you saw the whole story." The moment froze the room. My mother tilted her head, a faint frown forming. My sister glanced at me, curiosity piqued but tinged with unease. I set the first stack of papers on the coffee table, careful to lay them out chronologically: certificates, report cards, drafts. Everything that proved my work was never just a shadow behind hers. Then I played the videos, clips of presentations, rehearsals, performances, moments that had been praised by teachers, mentors, and friends, each one unmistakably mine. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My sister's smile faltered. The realization began to settle like dust in the sunlight. The truth was undeniable. "Wait," my mother whispered, voice trembling. She picked up a certificate, her hands shaking slightly. I thought this," she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The layers of favoritism, the unconscious rewriting of history, the years of overlooking me, it all confronted her in that single moment of undeniable evidence. I watched her struggle to reconcile what she had believed with what was real. I felt a rush of vindication, yes, but also a strange pang of sadness. This wasn't just about triumph, it was about exposure, about revealing the hurt she had caused. My sister shifted in her seat, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. For once I was not the invisible one. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply let the proof speak for itself. My mother's gaze lingered on me, a mixture of guilt, shock, and something like recognition. I saw the fleeting realization that she had been wrong all along. That her favoritism had not been earned, it had been assumed, and in that quiet, almost sacred moment I understood something essential. Revenge wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth. By showing her what was real, by presenting the evidence with clarity and calm, I had reclaimed my story without malice. I had made it impossible to erase myself any longer. When the last video ended, silence filled the room. My mother sank into the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, no words coming. My sister's face was pale, her eyes tracing the papers, the videos, the undeniable trail of my achievements. And I felt it, the long, awaited shift, subtle but powerful, like the first light of dawn breaking through years of shadow. I had done it not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the quiet, steady force of truth. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. The days after the reveal were quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic apology, no grand declarations of wrongdoing. Instead, there was a subtle shift in the air, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable. My mother's gaze lingered on me differently now, slower, as if she were finally taking the time to see what had always been in front of her. My sister no longer assumed the spotlight without question. There was now a pause, a hesitation, a recognition that maybe I had deserved it all along. It wasn't perfect. My mother still struggled to say the words aloud, caught in the inertia of years spent overlooking me. My sister's smiles were tentative, tinged with guilt she didn't yet fully understand, but I didn't need them to change overnight. I had learned something far more valuable. My worth wasn't dictated by their praise. My achievements, my hard work, my effort, they were mine, regardless of whether anyone recognized them immediately. I spent the evenings in my room differently now, no longer scribbling in frustration or hiding pieces of myself in corners where no one could see. I revisited my recordings, the old certificates, the projects that had once been stolen from me in attention if not in reality. There was pride in this process, a deep, quiet satisfaction in reclaiming the narrative. The fire of revenge had cooled into a steady warmth, a confidence that was steady, resilient, and unshakable. Sometimes I caught my mother lingering near my door, hesitating before speaking. She would ask about my current work, or offer a quiet, "I saw what you did," in passing. It was awkward, yes, and sometimes painfully belated, but it was real, and I realized that the validation I had longed for wasn't what I needed most. I didn't need to hear it to know I was enough. I needed only to see it in the reflection of my own effort, in the work I had built for myself. Even my sister began to change. She stopped assuming I would fade into the background and slowly began to acknowledge my contributions. There were no sweeping apologies or dramatic confrontations, just small, subtle shifts in behavior that spoke louder than words. We were still siblings, still complicated, still tangled in years of rivalry, but the tension between us had softened. There was room now for respect, even quiet admiration, in the spaces that had once been filled with resentment. One evening I sat alone, listening to a recording of one of my first performances, the one my mother had ignored. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had accomplished. Not for her, not for my sister, but for me. The recognition, delayed as it had been, no longer mattered. I had claimed my story, and in doing so, I had claimed myself. I realized then that the sweetest revenge isn't anger. It isn't the dramatic exposure or the humiliation of those who wronged you. It's the quiet reclamation of your own life, the building of something so undeniable, so real, that no one can ignore it. And as I looked around my room at the tangible proof of years of effort, I smiled, not with triumph over anyone else, but with peace in myself. I had been invisible once, yes, but no longer. I was here, I was seen, and that was enough.